On this channel, I like to run numbers for people. And our channel is called Million Dollars Made Easy. And I want to run some numbers for those of you that might not have 30 or 5 or 40 years to retirement, maybe just 20 or 25 or maybe 30 years. We want to run some numbers. I recently had a question. If somebody had $100,000 already, they would say like 38, 42, somewhere along in there around 40, had $100,000 already saved up. They wanted to see where they might be down the road when they get to retire, maybe in 20 or 25 years. And just 100,000 alone, if that would have been put in the S&P 500, the numbers were like they were for the last 100 years. In other words, if future returns are like, for example, 1923, this is what the individual would have after 25 years, 664,000 without adding another dime. Looks like about half of that up to 20 years. These are the actual numbers right here. There's the 332,560, and there's for the 25 years. You can see if you can stay in it for 30 or 35, you're going to have so much more money. But those of you that are already uh, closer to 40 and have a nest egg saved up, let's just run a few numbers for you just to encourage you. Here's 100,000 without putting another dime in. This is the worst case scenario right here in the reds. The three worst case scenarios, the first, second, and third worst, and these are the absolute best. This is the median in yellow. So just that 100,000 alone, being in this kind of a stock market, the S&P 500 for the last 100 years, these are the median numbers, 1.150 without adding another dime. But of course, we want to see what you could do if you have keep investing for the next 20 and 25 years, see how these numbers might change. So we're just going to pick $400. That's going to mean you're going to put, in the end, you're going to have 268,000 put in. That's 168,000 for the 400, and then of course the 100,000 you already began with. We're also going to increase that by 3%. You'll notice that going from 268, that'll put you up. You're putting in 390,000 in the end. But I want to run these numbers just to show you what that $400 a month, beginning with 100,000, increasing that $400 a month by 3%, where you would be if the market does anything like it's done in the last 100 years over a 20, 25, and 30-year period. The 20-year, the minimum you would have is 464,000, which if you look down here, it's 1929. Kind of makes sense, doesn't it? 1929, look at all these down years. In fact, if you started in 1929 with this scenario, that 100,000 after what 6 years, you still wouldn't even be back to 100,000, and you put in all this money. But I want you to notice something. If you can stay with it for 25, 30, and 35 years, even though you started out in the worst case scenario, the depression years, you still could have this kind of money. But we're looking at specific at people that have 20 and 25 years. If you have 25 years, given this scenario, if the market goes back to what it did in the depression years, with all these down years, you still would have $1.114 million given this scenario, starting with 100,000, putting in $400 a month, increasing that by 3% a year. You end up putting in 390,000, but in the worst case scenario, you would have had 1.114. Actually, that's not the worst case. That's 1929, 1.114. There's actually a year in there somewhere. 1925, you would have only had a million 78. No, millions right there. 1924. Get this straight yet. I'm just running this numbers. There's the actual numbers for 1924. Because why? You were going along really good, but then you got hit with the down years, the depression years, and so you end up with still $1,078,000 with this scenario, 100,000. So if the market does anything like it's done in the worst case scenario, hitting these down years, if you're in it for 25 years, you're going to start hit these 10 years, yes, but you're going to start hitting 20, 25, 19, 36. And by the time you get to 25 years, look at this, 52%. And that's why you can have these kind of numbers in the next 25 years. Again, I just want to run these numbers for different people. They asked me to run these. I want you to see just how amazing the S&P 500 can be for you if you can be in it for at least, I would like to see somebody be in it for at least 25 years. If you only have 20 years till retirement, you can still come out pretty good right here in this scenario. The worst case scenario is 424,000, no, 464,000, which was again 1929, which you can see right there. It started going down, down. And if you only have 20 years for it to come back, it's going to take you a little bit longer. If you had 5 more years, you go from 464 up to 1.114 million. So that difference, when you start out with down years like that, again, we're looking at the worst case scenario in the last 100 years. Let's just look at a couple other scenarios. we're going to be looking at, let's say we hit the 1973 and 74 oil embargo years. Let's see what might happen in 1973 if you did that. 1973, again, down years. The first 2 years at 100,000, you're actually down below 100,000. But look how quickly it came back. After 20 years, you had 1.434 million, and after 25 years, you'd have 3.686 million with the same scenario, putting in $400 a month, increasing that by 3% a year, which you end up putting in 390,000 over a 25-year period. And yet, look at the numbers we're looking at here. Did I update this? I don't think I updated for you. Sorry about that. This is a scenario 100,000. Actually, I didn't need to update it because this is for that period. We just wanted to look at just 1973 just to see how it would work out. 1974, you have one less down year. Watch these numbers change, specifically 1.4 million. Let's see after 20 years. Watch what happens. Went up to 1.679. Why? Because you had one less down year initially. Let's go to 1975 and watch how this 1.679. This is after 20 years, folks. Watch how 1975 changes. All of a sudden, you're up over $2 million. With this scenario, the person asked about starting 100,000. I'm just looking at $400, increasing that by 3% a year, and look at the kind of numbers we're looking at. Again, okay, I've already updated that. These are all the different numbers. So what this column's doing here is looking for every one of these years, putting it in this column, and we're looking at the absolute minimum, which we saw here was 1,078,000, which was 1925. But this is how the numbers are arrived at as we go down through here. Let's just do one other scenario. Let's say you do $500 a month, and you just increase that by 2% a year. And $500 the first month, $510. Let's see how it might change. Again, we have 1975 looking up, but these are the actual numbers for that scenario. You'd have, in the worst case scenario, which again we saw was 1924, was $1.131 million. And yet if we look at a run like 1973, which was another two down years, look at the kind of money we're looking at. For 20 years, 1.536, and after 25 years, 3.944. So don't necessarily give up on the S&P 500 just because you only have 20 or 25 years, because you are going to catch these good numbers. Even as we saw in 1929, you're going to catch some of these good years. 20 years, not quite as good as 25 years, but you can see, especially if you get over in this scenario right here, 1973 and 74, we saw, yeah, they were down 2 years, but look how it came back. If you have 20 or 25 years, you have from 1973 on, you have this column, and down to here. Look at these percentages you're getting. That's why that came out so good in 1973, but especially 1975. If you could skip those 2 years, look at where you'd end up with. That's why we went up and ended up looking at $2 million over even, let's see where we ended up here in 1975. Right there, 2,114,000 after 20 years, because you missed those two 73 and 74, which were down years. But even then, if you hit both of those, you still had 1.536 million. That's the kind of numbers we're looking at. If you can be in the S&P 500 and stay in it for at least 20, if not 25, and especially we've seen 35 and 40 years, just how it blows it out of the water. But those of you that don't have that much time, look at the kind of money you can have. Even though the first 2 years you might have been depressed and go, man, I'm losing money, I want to get out. Don't get out. Stay with it for the long run and look at the kind of numbers you can have. Even looking at 1973, after 20 years, 1.536. Our channel is called $1 Million Made Easy. I want consider subscribing to this channel. Tell your friends about these numbers. I'm getting responses from you that everybody's getting excited about these numbers because the S&P 500 really will amaze you as you look at the numbers. And our contention is that the next 20 or 25 years aren't going to be any different. They're going to be within this range. You might have a depression type scenario for a decade, 6 down years, 2000 it was 4 down years. But if you're in it for 2 or 3 decades, you're going to catch these kind of numbers because that's just what happened in the last 100 years. And we believe it's going to continue to do that, and we think that's just reasonable to think that way. So again, consider subscribing, tell your friends about this, like the video, and thanks for watching.